Welcome to the Modern Application Development 2 screencast. In this screencast, we will explore fetch APIs to request the data from the network. For this, you will need a browser, a Firefox or Chrome. I'm using Firefox to do all the exploration with Developer Console open. And then I'm also going to use an online tool called HTTP bin, where we can send requests and get responses and explore various API methods and formats for us to test our fetch requests. Right? Let's learn now what fetch means. Okay, let's go to MDN documents here. Okay, now fetch is a modern way of doing network access. In the sense, it is used to fetch data from the network. It returns a promise, like the document says. Hence, you'll have to wait for the promise to fulfill or resolve to get a response object. Right? Once the promise resolves, it gets a response object. Now, the promise never rejects if there's an HTTP error. There are two kinds of errors. One is either the network error or there can be an HTTP error. This specific promise will only reject if there's a network error, right? It can happen because if there's no internet or there's no permission, etc., etc. But it will never throw a rejection if there's an HTTP error, like for page not found or 505 errors like that. Hence, we'll always have to do a response OK check or the status check, or whether the status is 404, 505, checks like that before we actually try to get the data. It's something for us to remember. Now, fetch at the basic level takes two parameters. One is a resource, other one is an init. Now the resource can be a string or a request object. We'll look at the request object later. It can be a string, or which means it can be an URL. And init can take various attributes. By default, you don't need to pass. It will assume certain defaults and call. So let's look at that minimal HTTP request that we can send using fetch. Let's go back to console here. So I'm sending a request to this URL. I'm not passing any parameters here. I'm just leaving it as it is. I'm just giving a string URL and then handling the first promise, and then that gives me a response, and then calling response.json, which also gives me a promise. I'm handling that and printing the data. Now let's run this. Okay, result, got the answer, right? Now we can also go ahead and check request and response details here. You can check the request. It has no payload because it's doing by default get. You can check in the headers. You can see it's 200. It's doing a get, and you can also check the response, which is a JSON. You can see the JSON data here. Right, if you click on raw, you can actually see the JSON. Right. So this is the very basic HTTP request made using the fetch API. Okay, now let's go ahead and check what other parameters that we can send as part of the fetch. Now here you can see in the second part, you can actually send method, which by default is get. We can send other methods like post, put, etc. We can also send headers, body, and many other details. And also it can return, for example, many kinds of data. Let's check whether they have it listed here. No. Let's go to response object. Okay, so for example here we have used response.json, but we can get many other data types too. For example, we can get array buffer, we can get a blob, which is binary file type data. Usually we use it to download a file, which we don't know much about. Then you can obviously get JSON, and then you can get text. You can also get form data, right? These are the different types of data that you can get out of the response, or you can also send it as part of the request. So for example, I could have done text here, right? It would have run and given me the format in the form of text instead of in the format of JSON. That's something to remember. So those are all the functions available. They all return, including, you can see here, even the response.text returns a promise and you have to resolve. So they all return promises. You need to resolve the promises. Now, how do we handle error? For example, if it returned like a 404 or a 505, how do we handle the error? Like I told you before, that fetch actually doesn't throw rejection if there's a 404 error. We'll have to check response OK or response status. So let's do that and see how that looks. Let me paste piece of code. Here I'm actually calling an URL which is not found, which is a 404 URL. Then once it's called, then I get a promise. I'm checking the response. I'm actually checking here where the response is not okay, then I'm actually throwing an error. Or if I'm not, I can just do something else. But here, if the response is not okay, then I'm throwing an error. If the response is okay, then I'm getting response.json. If the response.json gets called, then it goes here into this part. If this error throw happens, then it goes into this part, right, and prints this. Let's run this. Okay, let's say the API was called, the request was sent to XHR. Let's expand this, and you can see that response was not found, right? So the 404 was thrown, but in our response, you can see that it has actually not failed, it has resolved, right? So you can see status is 404. We could have checked for that also, but we just changed OK and not OK. OK is false, so it comes here and says response not OK, which is printed here. Then it actually says HTTP error status is equal to 404, which we are printing here, and then throws an error. So this error has been caught by this catch, and hence it goes into in catch and the logging of the error. So this is how the error is handled in case you have a 404 or 505 and that kind of HTTP errors, right? The network error, if there was a network error, it would directly catch it here. Let's do something else. I'm just going to give completely wrong URL and see if it throws a network error. See here, you can already see in catch it has already thrown network error, right? So network error is thrown, but HTTP error actually comes into resolves, and then we have to catch it and throw it, right? So that's how you handle errors in case if you are making async call without an await word. We'll see how to use await with respect to fetch at the end. Now you can also send JSON data using fetch. It's pretty straightforward. You need to do some small changes. I'll show what are those. Just give me 1 second. Here, okay, here I have a JSON object data. I'm passing name and city. Then I'm making a post. Here in this specific case, I'm actually adding an extra object with the parameter set where method is equal to post. I'm setting header content is equal to application JSON. This is very important if you are actually sending the JSON data, and the body we have to send, which will have to contain the data, but this data has to be stringified. It has to convert this object into a string, a JSON string, and then set it to body to be sent. Hence, setting these headers is very, very important. If you don't set headers, it wouldn't know that you're sending a JSON data. Then I'm just looking for the response. If the response is I'm just printing here, I'm not checking status, okay, all of that. You should actually do it in when you're doing, and then I'm printing success and errors if there were. So let's run this. Okay, post is happening, post was sent and success. Now let's check here. Okay, headers. So you can see that it was post, what we said here, and then we'll set request headers. We'll check the request headers. You can see content type application JSON, and then request body also you can see here. This is the request body. You can make it raw if you want to. Here is the request body that we are sending. Then whatever the response HTTP bin got, usually it sends the same response back. So you can see that it has sent the same JSON back, to us, right? So this is how you send a JSON data. It can be post, it can be put as well. Now you can also do form submissions using the fetch. Let's see a form, a simple form. Here I have a simple form which has name and city. I can check the HTML here. So it's a simple form. You can see it here. There's no script, nothing. This is something else. Don't worry. Name and city. Name is a type text. City of type text. Name of the variable is or the parameter is city. Name of this is also name. You can also see that I have a ID set for my form, so I can get the reference to it. Now let's go to console and get the reference to form. So there is form data object that you can create by giving a reference to a form. This is a reference to form by ID. Here is my form by ID, and then I'm passing that form as a body to my fetch and just making a post request. I'm not even waiting for the response here. I'm just posting. This is like a fire and forget. I don't worry about what response I'm getting. Now let's run. So it made a post. You can see that 200 was returned, which means success. We can check what all was sent, right? So here you can see, let's say request. As you know, form is sent as part of the body. So you can see in the body the name is sent, the city is also sent. You can see the response. JSON is null. You can see form object is empty. Let's fill something and send. Raj Delhi. Okay. Now let's run this again, and let me clear this. Run this again. Okay, it's sent. Response has been got. Now you can see the form object here in the response, but we'll see request also. Here you can see as part of the body, you can see it's been set to Raj and Delhi. The request has been sent. You can check the headers too. You can see the post and the other details. And in the response, HTTP bin sends the same form object back. You can see that the form object has been sent back with city as Delhi and name as Raj. Similarly, you can do uploading files as well, right? Here I have a form with 3 elements with the same ID form, my form, and 3 elements. One is name, city, and a profile picture, but the profile picture is of type file. So since it's of type file, you can actually select a file from your local file system. So I can do Raj Bengaluru, and you can select some profile picture selected some profile picture, and then I can submit it. Let me just, so here is the code. So I'm getting a reference to my form, like I said, and then I'm trying to do a put. You can also do post to this URL endpoint and sending the form data as part of form body of the fetch. Now body of the request, as when I'm calling a fetch API. So my form has 3 elements, 1 file type and 2 regular text types, and I'm waiting for the response, printing the response, whatever I'm getting, right? So let's run. Okay, it's been sent. It took some time, as you can see. That's because it's uploading this whole image to the server, and depending on the size of the image, it might take more time. Let's check this thing. You can see that form contains attribute, and this is like a base64 data type, and then other objects from the form, attributes from the form Bengaluru and Raj. It's all been sent as part of body, and as part of response we're getting, as part of request also it was sent. Just hold on. Yeah, took a second to see because it's a binary data, and we got response, and this is all the base64 data. So that's what HTTP bin sends. You can check in the headers all the details as well, what all we sent. It's a multi-part form data, right? This is how you upload file. It's pretty straightforward, pretty clean. Now you can also download the file, or you can also download the blob format. For example, I'm trying to download a picture from a URL endpoint. This URL endpoint has a picture. If I go here, it should show a picture. Yeah, it has a picture. Now I can also get it asynchronously using fetch. I'm getting a picture, I'm printing a message, got it, and this picture is of type blob, and I'm just logging the blob. You could do many other things. You can create a URL out of it. You can create a element and set the image source as this blob URL, and then make it appear in the page. But here I'm just going to log it to console. Let me just run. Okay, so you can see that we got a blob image, and the size is 35K. It's of type image / JPEG. You can also see that here if you see the raw data, right? You can see it. That's the image that we got as part of the response. Okay, that's how you get a blob. Now you can also instead of sending this separately URL and parameters, you can also send the request and header object created beforehand. For example, here I'm creating a headers which has application.json. Then I'm actually creating a request object with those headers and the other details, and then I'm making a call. Let me just replace this URL with real HTTP bin URL, so that we can just send it and see if it works. Right, we can do post, and we can send that data, right? So okay, let's remove this constant because you can't change. I just have to reload because I can't redefine that same constant again. Okay, now if I run it, since I'm using say console window again and again, I'm just trying to not to make them constant because you can't change the values. Anyway, here you can see that it's been posted and it works. So now if you are a lot of cases where you're going to repeat the same headers or repeat the same request, you can pre-create them and keep reusing them for various fetch requests. So that's how you create headers and requests to reuse them again and again. Now we know that we can also use async await, instead of making it resolving the promise manually by ourselves. So like any other async function, you can add the keyword await, but here that returns a response. Response is also a promise, so you have to add await for that as well, and then you print the log data. So when you run this, you can see that the data is printed directly. Now if I don't do await here and then print, this is a promise. Right here you can see that's a promise, hence we have to add await here too. So there are at least usually 2 promises to be resolved before you can access the data. That's all. Actually, you can go to Fetch API page on MDN Web Docs to read more about it. Also look at the chart for browser support details. At the end of the page it says what browsers support. Almost all modern browsers support, so you should be able to use it and use it very efficiently. And that's all for in today's screencast. Have a good day. Thank you.